Hi everyone, welcome back to Lifting the Lamp. This is a video I've wanted to do for a while now on some of the traits in spiritual teachers that should be red flags for you. This episode is all about cult leaders and false prophets and how to identify them, and just broadly how to identify narcissists that you might encounter on the spiritual path. You know, there seems to be a sustained interest in popular culture for stories about weird cults or cult leaders or spiritual teachers who have narcissistic or antisocial traits. But not only is this issue relevant because it holds such fascination for people, but it's also, for people who are spiritual seekers, can be very sabotaging to the spiritual path to be led astray by people who present themselves as these great teachers and then end up just being the complete opposite of an enlightened individual. And you can waste a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of emotional and psychological energy on people that don't deserve your respect for being great spiritual teachers and who are really just out to stunt your development rather than encourage it. But at first instance, it can often be hard to identify such people because they're very deceitful and they often mask their true intentions. Unfortunately, I've met several such people along the way during my spiritual journey, and while I've learnt a lot in terms of what to avoid and what to look out for and what to warn others against, and it gave me plenty of people to forgive as I try and learn how to practice forgiveness, perhaps I would have been better off without ever meeting such people. And maybe I would have been better off without them ever having crossed my path. And if I can help you to avoid that, then that's something that's definitely worthwhile. And remember as well that a cult isn't always something that's overtly spiritual. There can be political groups that are cultish as well. So just keep that in mind. And entire ideologies that have cult-like characteristics. I mean, I don't even really need to say that. I mean, this is 2023 after all. It's self-evident that there are ideologies that have cult-like characteristics to them. You know, it can seem like a cruel contradiction that the spiritual path is supposed to be something so beautiful and elevating, which sets one apart so much from ordinary life and all of its trappings, and yet purportedly spiritual groups can be one of the most susceptible vehicles for just the worst kinds of people. People who get described in modern parlance as malignant narcissists or antisocial personalities, they're master manipulators, or at least they fancy themselves as such. And so they're going to try and hide somewhere where they can be seen as the ultimate good guy. All the better to deceive vulnerable and well-meaning people. And a lot of the time, the spiritual path can attract people that are completely lost. They feel empty inside, or they feel like something about their life has made them feel alienated, and they're looking for something more because of those feelings of being lost or alienated. But people who are in that state can be very susceptible to all kinds of ill behavior from others, and they can also be very unstable towards other people themselves. These are all things that unfortunately need to be navigated from time to time when you're looking for a spiritual path, because people can often look for the same thing for very different reasons, and people can be drawn to spirituality who are broken people because they really do need help. I mean, everybody is broken to some extent, and it's perhaps a noble intention that they have to try and fix the thing that they see in themselves that is broken. But there can be some profound issues that people bring with them that go along with that. And sometimes they're so profound that the work that they're doing spiritually is not enough, and people just end up forming toxic relationships in group settings. The other reason why spiritual groups can be fertile ground for the emergence of narcissists who then recast themselves as some kind of spiritual leader is because narcissistic personality types can often have very grandiose views of themselves. They see themselves as a god or some kind of great magician or great leader or whatever it might be. And they might even believe that they're the center of the universe in some sense, that their story is more important than everybody else's. And so those kinds of people can see spiritual claims about themselves and asking others to accept those claims as a way of validating the feelings they have about themselves as being godlike and superior to other people and worthy of worship and adoration as an individual. But what are some of the red flags that somebody may be a cult leader or a narcissist who is trying to manipulate you, perhaps using spirituality? Well, one obvious giveaway is somebody who overtly makes grandiose claims about themselves. This is the person who says, I'm the reincarnation of Jesus, or I'm the Messiah, or I'm the great beast, or I'm some other god incarnate, I'm the 10th avatar of Vishnu, I'm the world teacher, etc., etc. And in the context of a cult, you can see a cult of personality growing up around the leader, somebody who is decidedly ordinary if you really take an honest look at their life. And yet everything they do is revered, is given an overly exaggerated sense of importance, and the ground that they walk on is worshipped for no apparent reason other than the claims that this person has made about themselves. Look, I'm not denying the fact that there are spiritually gifted individuals out there. I'm not even denying the fact that there are people who are called or chosen spiritually in these times, because I believe that there are, most definitely. In fact, I know that there are. But to create this big narrative about how one person is the great leader that everybody must adore, and if they don't, then that is deeply offensive and disrespectful, that is something that comes straight from the ego, and a very big ego at that. Somebody who is truly spiritually developed, who has reached a point where they could be regarded as a savior of humanity, wouldn't care about accolades and fanfare and all of that sort of thing accompanying their attainment. And indeed, they may not even see fit to even reveal their level of spiritual attainment. And it's a bit like saying, I'm so humble. The moment you say that, you're discrediting yourself, because by definition you couldn't have humility if you claim to be humble. It's the same with making grandiose claims about who you are spiritually. Maybe it's true, maybe some person really is a highly enlightened being who's come here for some important mission. But then, in that case, it's not the personality of the person that is doing anything. It's the spirit that works through them. And the more in touch that person becomes with the spirit, the more their personality will diminish. So if somebody creates this big story about how important they are as an individual, that's a warning sign that they're not a genuine spiritual teacher, and in fact they're most likely a cult leader. Another thing that's kind of related to that last point, but not quite as extreme, is people who claim to be great spiritual authorities by virtue of some special kind of title that they've inherited. This variation of the dubious spiritual teacher usually hinges upon being a member of some group or some esoteric order, which is the one true lineage, or the one true inheritor of a tradition in its pure form, with all of the other lineages and all the other traditions being heresy. And so that the grand Poobah, the great leader who is appointed to be the leader of this particular sect, is the one leader for that particular faith or that particular spiritual tradition, whose word must never be deviated from simply by virtue of the title that they have claimed. You know, it's very peculiar when people who are claiming to be seeking after transcendental spiritual knowledge, rising above all of the division and separation of the material world, will then in the very next breath try and split hairs and say that their particular group is the only one that has the right answer because of X, Y, and Z. If people go into that kind of sectarianism, it's obvious that they don't get it when it comes to spirituality. The divine has no sect. It has no religion. It doesn't care what particular group you belong to, what particular path you use to approach it. Maybe don't be a complete worshipper of the dark forces like some of the people in influential positions in our society. But, you know, anything that's genuinely seeking after the divine is probably going to have you on the right path, you know, and to see the unity of all of that and the syncretism of all that is true spirituality. Another behavior to look out for is people who engage in behavior that's not very nice, but use spirituality to try and mask that behavior. So an example might be somebody who is overstepping in terms of trying to micromanage you and control your life, and compel you to do things in your own personal life that are really none of their business. And then that person saying, oh, it's because I'm trying to guide you on the right path spiritually. I'm speaking from the authority of someone who is this or that, occupies this or that spiritual station that is above you, or, you know, that sort of thing is a big warning sign that they're not a genuine ally in your spiritual path. Another example of this might be somebody who is cruel or insensitive towards you, or engages in gaslighting by minimizing your suffering and telling you that your suffering isn't important, or you shouldn't be reacting to it in the way that you are, and making you feel ashamed of that, whether it's anger or sadness or fear, and then justifying it in terms of saying, oh, well, it's just, you just don't understand the higher spiritual purpose behind all of these things, and it's only your ego that is seeing these things as bad. That may be true, ultimately, but if someone's not ready for that insight, you can't give it to them, because it's only going to cause them more pain. You know, and oftentimes the real intent behind such advice from purportedly spiritual people has nothing to do with trying to help you, and that's just another gaslight. It's really just about them wanting to feel superior to you and put you down, and using a correction on spiritual matters as the means by which to do that. Another thing to watch out for people on the spiritual path who claim to be spiritual, and particularly spiritual teachers, is people who can't take basic criticism. So often this takes the form of somebody challenging the position of a spiritual teacher just by wanting to engage in debate and discussion, asking an honest question, or even more outrageously, asking that person to perhaps justify why they are making such grandiose claims about themselves. And that really pushes the spiritual narcissist button, because it triggers their insecurity. And if they know that they're full of deceit and they're not who they say they are, it can make them very defensive about the need to justify themselves. And so you'll often see in these situations the cult leader or prospective cult leader lashing out and getting angry at a person for asking what should be a pretty basic question. But it's a question that they take offense to because the person hasn't spent enough time reading their books and knowing every aspect of their teachings inside and out, or because this person asks, are you really sure that you're as important as you say they are? And they just cannot take it. It's just too much for them, and they start to go on a tirade. But what you'll see with the spiritual deceiver is that they will try again to mask their outbursts by making it seem like it's just a pep talk, like, well, if you really had faith, if you really had the spiritual strength that I had, you would know not to ask that question, because you would, whatever, you would just feel that it's right, and you would have wanted the knowledge enough that you would have got the answer yourself, or something along those lines. That is another warning sign. It's a sign of somebody who has a very strong ego and is trying to trick people into thinking that they have little to no ego. Another thing to watch out for is people who are leaders of a spiritual group who try and put you in compromising situations. If there's a situation that they want you to go into that makes you feel uncomfortable, that does make you feel compromised, you've got every right to say you don't feel comfortable with that. And if the person is a decent person, let alone a spiritually enlightened person, they should just respect your wishes. But if they're really eager for you to engage in a certain type of behavior that you find compromising, it may be that they're trying to get leverage over you, that they can use against you in the future if you ever try and leave them or cross them. So that's something to be very careful of. If somebody doesn't respect your boundaries and they try and pressure you into behavior that you don't want to do, just stay away from them. Another thing to watch out for is spiritual leaders who play favorites, or they do little things to kind of segregate the group into different groups, and they feed them different information, and perhaps they favor one group over another, and they create little cliques. This sort of thing is a warning sign again that somebody, the leader of this group, is perhaps trying to manipulate people, and perhaps even pit people against one another, trying to control people, trying to create a ranking system among people, which is a sign again of pride, because it's usually based on which people validate the leader's ego the most. All things that indicate somebody is not sufficiently developed on the spiritual path to be any sort of leader, and possibly also that they're a manipulator who is trying to do you harm. So if you see cliques forming, if you see information being shared with some people but not others, and you see people being segregated, and perhaps if you catch out people being given different information seemingly, big warning sign. stay away from the leader of that group, stay away from their group. Another thing to watch out for that indicates a false spiritual teacher is somebody who gives you false choice. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, often if somebody is trying to run a group which they're trying to turn into their own personal little cult, you can't know that it's a cult, because then you won't fall for the trap. People need to believe that the group is open and it's democratic and everybody is just free to do their own thing. Everyone is there of their own free will, and they're there because of an honest personal yearning after whatever teachings are being presented. When in fact, if you look at the actual group dynamics, underneath it, if you're dealing with a cult or something similar, there will be very rigid rules where, you can't miss a single meeting, or it's like the biggest thing in the world. You can't ever disagree with the leader or with the dogma that is being presented. And if you do disagree, your difference of opinion cannot be respected, but must be argued against again and again until you reach a point of exhaustion where you don't want to fight anymore. You're basically psychologically beaten into submission, into accepting something you never believed, but it's dressed up as debate and discussion, and a feigned openness by the leader to that alternative point of view, when in fact all they ever want to do is change your mind and are never willing to change theirs, because of course they're already right about everything. And one way that this false choice often presents itself is when the spiritual leader uses the sandwich technique during a disagreement that you have with them, in which their authority or their control over you feels threatened. The sandwich technique is a common manipulation technique where you have the thing that you're really trying to say, that you really want to sink into the other person's consciousness, and you place that statement in the middle of two statements which are saying the thing that you want the other person to believe you're really saying. So to go back to the example of somebody who missed one cult meeting because, I don't know, they had to see their sick grandmother or something. The cult leader or the spiritual manipulator might say, oh, that's okay. Everybody has freedom. They're free to choose what meetings they come to, and when everyone's on their own path. You really should come to the meeting. You should, because you don't have an excuse not to. This is the most important thing in the world you can do, and you should never ever miss an opportunity to do it. But if you don't want to do it, that's your own choice. You do whatever you want. You see, it sounds like you're being given a choice, but that statement is really insincere, and the thing that the person's really trying to say is that you don't have a choice. But they're trying to disguise the fact that they're telling you you don't have a choice. So it's very manipulative and very deceitful, and certainly not the sort of thing that any sort of spiritual teacher should engage in. And related to this, you'll often see that the cult leader or the false spiritual teacher is very controlling and very demanding in ways that a normal person simply isn't. You can't ever miss a meeting. You can't, God forbid, you ever attend another spiritual group, because there is only one truth after all. And, God forbid that you find any sort of wisdom in any other tradition outside of the dogma. That is a direct challenge to the authority of the cult leader or prospective cult leader, and is unacceptable. Often you'll see this kind of so-called spiritual teacher getting very jealous of the time that you spend with, in particular, members of your own family, as well as maybe just friends or engaging in activities which are even just not exactly always keeping the dogma of the cult front and center at all times. Just having fun can be seen as a direct challenge to the authority of the cult leader and the control that they have over your life. Yeah, family definitely seems to be a big one. That they seem to, because it's such a strong bond that people have naturally in their lives. It seems to be the one that the cult leader resents the most and wants to destroy the most. And they'll say all kinds of vile things about how bad a person's family is because of that deeply held jealousy and need to control and possess others. Another obvious giveaway is if you're part of a spiritual group with a particular charismatic leader, sometimes they're not even all that charismatic, but they seem to have something going for them that makes them exude some kind of authority that people are drawn to. You may notice that person, a lot of people leave, or a lot of people seem to fall out with that individual. And there's always a different excuse. It's like, oh, this person just was having trouble with this, or this person had a bit of a disagreement about that. And there's always a different story, but the common denominator is the person who they've left, who is the spiritual teacher. So that suggests that either one of two things. Either the spiritual leader has very bad luck, that all kinds of people leave them for all kinds of different reasons, or maybe the common denominator is the spiritual teacher themselves, and they are continuously doing things where they're attacking other people and making them feel not welcome anymore, and that's the thing that is leading them to leave in each case. But you would never get that story from the leader themselves. But if you start to notice a pattern, that's probably a red flag that they're certainly not a good person to be trying to learn spirituality from. The last thing that I'd like to mention when it comes to spiritual groups, which is a massive red flag, is a lack of accountability. We're human beings, and whenever you're involved in groups and organizations, sometimes bad things are going to happen between people, and lines are going to be crossed in terms of the relationships that people attempt to have with each other, or conflicts that might arise between people. But if you've got a spiritual group where those conflicts cannot be resolved to bring either reconciliation between the aggrieved parties or justice for the wronged party, and terrible things that are done within the group are simply swept under the rug because it's not convenient for the leadership to acknowledge them, then that is not a group that is worthy of your time. And certainly if they present themselves as a spiritual group, all the more reason why they're just hypocrites and they're worthless shepherds, and they don't deserve for you to be a part of them, to be giving them financial resources and time and unpaid labor for what? So that they can just throw you under the bus the moment that something bad happens to you under their watch. Get rid of groups like that from your life. They serve no purpose. You're better off following a spiritual path alone than being part of that kind of a group. So that's my list of things to look out for in spiritual groups, which might indicate that the group or the leader of the group is not genuine and may even be a cult leader. Or you may even be a part of a group that is a cult. Now, the thing is with spiritual groups and alternative spirituality, often the term cult gets too loosely applied, I find. It's like anything that isn't the church down the road is a cult. Anything that's different from what we've been doing for 2,000 years is a cult. That's not fair. People can explore all kinds of different alternative forms of religion. There can be all kinds of groups that spring up with very good intentions. There are some groups that are just overtly cults, and they meet the very specific criteria that a cult has. But sometimes it can be confusing because you have a group which is a genuine religious tradition or alternative spiritual movement, which is not in itself a cult, but sometimes within that tradition or within that movement you get one group and there's usually one leader who is responsible for the group dynamic, who is a prospective cult leader, who wants to be a cult leader and makes the group cult-like, even though the rest of the movement isn't like that. That can certainly happen as well, but it's not very comfortable territory to navigate, to know whether your entire belief system is a cult or just that particular person's take on it. It can be very uncertain to have to navigate those kinds of waters, but often that is a thing that can happen. But anyway, those are the kinds of behaviours, the forms of leadership, and the kinds of groups to watch out for if you don't want to join a cult and you don't want to be manipulated by people, in particular people who are trying to use spirituality to manipulate you. So I hope you find that helpful. I hope that you never have to encounter people such as I've described in this video, but you may well meet them, and if you do, you are forearmed with knowledge that will allow you to evade their clutches and will allow you to stay on the true path of self-discovery without anybody else imposing their will on you. So, again, I hope you enjoyed that. Leave your comments down below if you have any. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel to support my work. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you next time.